Hello and welcome to Mandibil. This is around part 20 or 21 of my deconstruction series on Keith Frankish's lectures on illusionism. And first of all, before we head into the deeper end and continuing the deconstruction, I was just, Googling illusionism just to have a sort of second opinion about what we're actually dealing with, right? And I'm not saying that Wikipedia is the last word in this case or anything like that, but just to have some other kind of approach to explaining what the hell we're dealing with, because I don't find that Keith Frankish is doing a good job in explaining what the hell he's talking about, right? And that is always a red flag to me, right? Always. If you can explain it simply, you should consider that the dude doesn't understand what he's talking about, right? Or at least it's smoke and mirrors, probably, right? Now, if it's like how to, change the tire on your bicycle, and it sounds complicated to the way some person explained it, doesn't necessarily mean that the person doesn't know how to change the tire on a bicycle, right? But it seems like a simple job, right? So why would you complicate it unless there's something wrong with you? You're simply unable to explain it simply because you don't understand the approach of the receiver of your message. Or you have just made it so complicated that it's dysfunctional, right? Something is up, right? Something is wrong. Something's got to give there, right? I have to make some kind of judgment what to do with it. I'm not just going to sit back, which I suppose is what he expects people to do, and say, well, I guess that's one other way to do it, right? No. If it doesn't make sense to me, or I can have a good overview of what it's saying and so on, I'm going to reject it, right? I can't wait all my life for somebody to explain this shit to me, right? And if you spend 6 hours trying to explain it and I don't get it, right, or I seem to get something that doesn't hang together, I'm going to reject it, man, right? Okay, so if you go to Wikipedia, there are 3 different disambiguations for the word or the term illusionism. There's something in art, and I'm just curious what that might be. It's not that we're not going to spend a lot of time on that, but I'm just going to check what the hell that is, right? In art history means that might actually be better to just get that overview. Let me just step back a bit. In art history means either the artistic tradition in which artists create a work of art that appears to share the physical space with the viewer, or more broadly, the attempt to represent physical appearance, and precisely also called mimesis. The term realist may be used. Okay, I don't know what that. I don't care. But then curiously, there are 2 terms of illusionism within a philosophical discourse, you could say, right? And one is a general illusionism in philosophy, and then illusionism in consciousness. I was not aware of that. And let's see what it says about philosophy. Illusionism is a metaphysical theory, which I believe illusionism for Keith Frankish also is, right? It's also some kind of metaphysical mumbo jumbo, right? But this is about free will. It was first propounded by Professor Saul Smilansky in Haifa. Although there exists a theory of consciousness bearing the same name, illusionism, it is important to note that the 2 theories are concerned with different subjects. Well, how stupid to have the same term for 2 very seemingly closely related but still different subjects. How stupid, man, right? Okay, so let's take consciousness, right? Which is the one we're dealing with here. Let's see. Eliminative materialism, also called, excuse me, it jumps a bit here. I wasn't prepared for that. Let's take the jump once more. So it's about eliminative materialism. Illusion is an active program within eliminative materialism to explain phenomenal consciousness as an illusion. It is promoted by the philosophers Dennett, Frankish, and Garfield. I think I actually, come to think, it's been a while. The first parts of this series I might have actually been here before. So excuse me for that. I suddenly realized I've done this before, maybe. Proponents, according to Chalmers, proponents argue that once we can explain consciousness as an illusion without the need for supposing a realist view of consciousness, we can construct a debunking argument against realist views of consciousness. Yeah, but what is a view, right? What is a view? Is that some kind of thinking? Or is it some kind of, you have to use your qualia, your senses, which is always directly connected with qualia, right? As soon as you open your eyes, there they are, the qualia, right? It's one and the same, actually, right? This line of argument draws from other debunking arguments like the evolutionary debunking argument in the field of metaethics. Such arguments note that morality is explained by evolution without, I don't care for that morally. Illusionists generally hold that once, this is criticism, illusionists generally hold that once it is explained why people believe and say they are conscious, the hard problem of consciousness will have been dissolved. David Chalmers agrees that a mechanism for these beliefs and reports can and should be identified using the standard methods of physical science, but disagrees that this would support illusionism, stating that the datum illusionism fails to account for is not reports of consciousness, but rather first-person consciousness itself. Yes, and this is probably something that is problematic with these kinds of thinkings, that there's possibly a jump between what you could call the awareness of your experience and your awareness of the experience. In other ways, somebody like Bernardo Castro calls it consciousness and meta-consciousness, right? When consciousness is just you have awareness of your experiences, right? But you can also be aware that you are having the awareness. In other words, you could say that philosophy is a kind of meta-awareness, right? You can sit and philosophize all you want about your experiences. Those are not a part of those experiences or the awareness of the experiences. They are a meta-awareness of the whole thing together, in a sense, right? And this delineation is not necessarily clear when these philosophers refer to consciousness. It's as if it's everything. But I think you should be aware, it would be, and that's something I'm working on in my book at the moment, right? That there is a distinction there. It might not be very easy to make the distinction, but I think it's important to do that. Because I think that which we refer to as like human beings are very conscious, we are actually talking about the meta-consciousness, or the meta-awareness, or the awareness of awareness, right? Rather than being aware of the experience, because a dog must be aware of its experiences. It's not just a show that is not being aware of, but it's probably not, possibly not, who knows, right? I can't tell you, but a qualified guess would be that they're probably not as aware of their awareness as human beings are, right? We can sit there all day being aware of what we are aware of, right? And think about it and construct all sorts of bullshit philosophy like illusionism and all sorts of other kinds of idealism and so on, all sorts of weird philosophy, right? And go completely mental about it, right? Rather than, keep it down to earth, in my opinion, which is the best approach, right? There shouldn't be anything in your philosophy that anyone else is not able to actually experience, right? There cannot be anything. It shouldn't be, just to take that sidetrack, right? It shouldn't be so complicated in a philosophical, academic manner that people are saying, well, I guess I'm too stupid, right? Because that's exactly what you don't want. Philosophy shouldn't be that complicated. It's only because all these weirdo academics, they go completely mental in this meta-awareness, right? And all their fancy objectifications and abstractions, they go mad in this cloud castle shit, right? There shouldn't be anything in your philosophy that anybody else, it's almost like a dog should be able to do it. I'm not saying that's the case, but, trying to do that would actually get you to a point where anybody can do it. And in my opinion, that's the reason why you want, not only is it the best philosophy, the best foundation of metaphysics, in my opinion, to start with the qualia. Because everything tells me everyone has access to their qualia. How they work from the qualia, how they abstract from it, and what they do in metaconsciousness, that might be a completely different thing. They might disagree completely or be unable to do it, but at least they have the same colors, the same sounds, the same whatever, right? And we could go a bit further from there in my philosophy if we had the time, but I won't do that. But it's again, I don't buy this. This seems like there's a little criticism here, right? Okay. He separates consciousness from beliefs and reports about consciousness. Well, yes. It's a huge mix of categories, right? And are you talking about the awareness of the qualia, or the awareness that you are aware of qualia, right? There's some meta-consciousness I spoke of before. And it seems like it's just, they have pulled out the 200 most complicated words in the dictionary and then thrown them at you and say, oh, I've done some philosophy, right? I'm not buying it. Okay. Let's head further into... I just want to mention something completely different. But I found a few. I was looking into my music collection the other day. I have a fairly large collection of music, right? And mostly on compact disc, which is sort of a medium that has been looked down upon for more than a decade now, and maybe even a couple of decades, right? And I watched a channel where they started talking about CD is actually on the rise. The sales of CDs is on the rise. Incredible. And Discogs, which is a big, music, where they register different versions of various music, CDs and LPs and all kinds of music, right? Even music videos. DVDs, they have registering a fourfold increase in CDs put for sale during the last couple of years. I wasn't actually aware of this. Now I don't follow this trend deeply, but it's just when sort of the average channel starts to talk about something, then it's sort of the canary in the coal mine, right? So it actually warms my heart, because since I had actually a record store back in the mid-10s, in around 2015, 2016. And it's actually the time when I started this channel. So you may go all the way back and listen to some of my videos where I mentioned this when I was a bit younger than now. So much younger than today. After I had, and this was a vinyl record store, right? Purely secondhand vinyl. And I had to close it down and so on. Never mind. But after that, I decided to sell all my vinyl records, what I had left, and only collect. I still have a few vinyls. I can't help it. When I find something interesting and cheap, I buy it, right? But I said to myself, I'm going to build a music collection purely in CDs, right? This is going to be my go-to. And because it's so cheap, CDs, right? You can get, you basically get them thrown at you, right? In some thrift stores, you can get 10 CDs for $2, right? Like, it's ridiculous. Or $3 or something like that, right? It's 25 cents a piece or something like that, right? If you buy like 5 or 10 or something like that, right? It's ridiculous, and they have no clue what they're selling. Now, most of it is the mainstream pop artists, like Celine Dion, Janet Jackson, these huge names, and they are not to my taste. That's not the kind of music I'm looking for, right? But now and again, you find something really interesting, right? And what I am going for is not the newer remastered stuff. There might be something that is interesting, right? But I'm going for the classic rock issued on CD in the 80s. And that's like, Rainbow, Deep Purple, Cream, Beatles, progressive rock, Yes, Genesis, this kind of stuff on the early CD issues, which are, I don't know if you remember, but back in the day, they had this 3-figure code, which was AAD or ADD or DDD, right? And, for classical music CDs, it was DDD, that was the best, which was digital recording, digital mixing, and digital mastering, right? But the old albums, or the old artists who created the albums before the CD, they would be mastered only in digital. The rest of it would be mastered analog. So that's why the AAD CDs from the 80s are attractive, because they have actually a very vinyl-like and dynamic sound, while the ADD and DDD, which basically is the rest of it from the late 90s and so forth, are more sterile and flat in the sound. And there's also all the problem with the loudness war, right? So if you are going into CDs, check if there are any AAD CDs among, and buy them. If they're good condition, buy them, because they are going to rise in price, I bet you, right? Now, it depends on whether or not you like the kind of music. I like the old 60s, the 70s, and early 80s, right? I like that music. That's from my childhood, right? So looking for these are just the old. They look not fancy at all. Like the packaging, they are the bare bone, what they call jewel case with a black spine and standard CD, no design, just standard CD pressings, right? And the point is, if it says AAD clearly somewhere on the back and sometimes also on the disc, it's possibly a very good, pressing. So, pressing, it's the best master you can get on digital. And funnily enough, these days, you could argue that vinyl pressings are more digital than the early or the mid 80s digital or CD pressings, right? Because AAD is sort of 2/3 analog, right? While modern vinyl pressings are DDA, which is digital recording, digital mixing, and analog mastering, right? So there's 2/3 digital, the modern pressings, which are also suffer from possibly lackluster pressing facilities in the vinyl pressing, units, various places. They're getting after it, but a lot of know-how and how to do this kind of pressing and the quality of the vinyl and so on is not at the same level as they were back in the late 80s or early 90s, right? Early 90s records can be very, very good in quality, very good sound, right? And some of the early 70s and even late 50s records some of them sound incredibly. If you take a vinyl record like Harry Belafonte, Live at Carnegie, which is incredible sound. These are recorded on the old, valve amplifiers, right? The sound you get there, it's incredible, right? Okay. That's a side story. I'm just, I predicted like 7 years ago, 6 years ago, CDs are also going to have a comeback, just like vinyl did more than a decade ago, right? So this next decade, the 2020s, is actually going to be this compact disc decade, because all this vinyl has risen so much in value that it's sort of, I don't want to pay 400 or what's it, $50 for some album just because I want the music. If I could get the same on a CD for $2, right? It's like, is it really worth it to get it on vinyl, right? And then you have to have the record player, and I got accidentally destroyed my record player a few years ago, which was stupid, right? And now I have a Reggae Apollo CD player, which is a great analog sounding player and a good amplifier. So why wouldn't I collect CDs? It's cheap music, and you can also rip it and put it on your computer and put it in iTunes and so on, right? There are things about CDs that is actually not too bad. Yes, I would always agree that the best sounding vinyl will always be better than even the best CDs. That's it, depending on your equipment and so on. The highest level of fidelity you can get, that will always be vinyl, I think. It will never be challenged, because it's not physical media that ultimately will be the pinnacle. Who knows about the future, right? But so far vinyl is the deal. If you want to get to the highest level of fidelity in music, then it will probably vinyl, right? Probably be vinyl. But from an everyday point of view, I mean, I have a 3,000 plus CD collection at this point, counting all my CD singles also, right? Which is a small niche of interest I have also, right? If I had to buy that on vinyl, much of it is 90s and zeros CDs, which are very cheap, right? If you had to buy that on vinyl, it would cost a fortune, right? So I would rather have the music, more music and less vinyl in this way, right? So it's just, it's swings and roundabouts. It's cost and benefits, right? So, okay, that's another 20 minutes of talking of not doing a deconstruction. I'm only going to make this lecture or deconstruction series longer than it needs to, right? Okay, we are heading into what he calls the debunking argument. So let's dive in.
Debunking argument. And this is an argument that has been discussed in some detail by David Chalmers in his work. Chalmers is not an illusionist, of course, but he thinks there are some good arguments for it, particularly this one, the debunking argument. And he sets out the argument himself and gives a lot of attention to it. Okay, so it's briefly this. If we can explain why we believe that a certain thing exists without supposing that it does in fact exist, then our belief in its existence isn't justified. So
what? It's again all these convoluted sentences. It feels to me like, let me find a complicated sentence that sort of bitch slaps the reader into, okay, I can't figure it out, so I guess he's smart, right? But let's take it on, right? If we can, no, there's no we that can explain. You can explain. Who's we? All 8 billion people on planet Earth. And if there's one who can't explain, then it doesn't matter. It's this we. There's no we, right? That's you. You can explain, right? Okay, why we believe? No, there's no we that can believe, right? Again, there's no we believing. Yeah, we can agree upon each of our beliefs, but only the individual can have a belief, right? I know it's a kind of a figure of speech, but I'm very about these things, right? This collective idea of we, I don't like that, right? Always be careful when somebody says we. It's one of the most dangerous words, which is we, right? Believe that a certain, right? Belief? What? I have a belief? Where did that come from? Oh my God, I have a belief. I guess I have to take it seriously because I have a belief, right? Why wouldn't you call it a philosophy? If he said something like, if I can explain why my philosophy of this and this, well, again, it would be closer to a good statement, in my opinion, right? A certain thing exists. Well, now we're talking about existence. What do you mean about a thing and a certain thing? What's the difference between a thing and a certain thing, right? Certain, do you mean it's absolutely beyond any kind of doubt or any kind of skepticism? But if it's certain, you don't need a belief, right? You don't need to have a belief in something that is certain. If it's certain, you don't need to believe it. It's certain, right? And what do you mean by exist? Well, that's ontology. What does it entail that something exists? That something exists, right? So you need to explain what you mean by existence in order for you to make this argument, right? Without supposing, right? Supposing that the thing does exist. If we can explain why we believe a certain thing exists without supposing that the thing does exist, but why would you have a belief that something exists without supposing it? I don't understand what the hell he's trying to say, right? It's stupid. Then our belief in existence is not justified. But that's not our belief, right? And what is belief? I don't like belief in epistemology, right? This sounds like epistemology, not metaphysics, right? It's just so fucking convoluted, man, right? Even my deconstruction of it is not enough for me to say, well, I guess I have an idea what he's talking about. I might have an idea, but it's so fluffy to me. I'm going to say, well, I'm not going to take. I'm just speeding ahead, right? Fuck off with this shit, Ryan, right?
Take UFOs. People have there's a lot of reports of people seeing UFOs.
But it's an unidentified flying object. Well, it's something that is objectified, moving about in the air, not on the ground, right? It's flying. So it must be, moving about and in the air. And it's an object because it's not a cloud or, whatever, right? It's unidentified, right? Why? There could be a lot of that shit around, right? It doesn't mean that it entails aliens or whatever, something like that. Just stick with what we are talking about, right?
I suppose these people are often strongly convinced that they've seen alien spaceships. And if we can explain why they believe that, without supposing that they actually did see an alien spaceship, say because they saw some strange cloud formation, or they saw a secret military aircraft or whatever, and because they interpreted it in a certain way because of all they'd read about UFOs and so on. If we can explain their beliefs about UFOs in those sorts of terms, in terms of other experiences of other things,
but again, a belief in something is kind of a willful kind of decision. Well, I like to believe in this because it makes them feel good or something like that, right? It's not philosophy. And that's why qualia is so fucking important, in my opinion, because then you don't disconnect yourself from your everyday experiences. If you do that, anything goes, basically, right? Then you can't argue against all these kinds of beliefs because it's beliefs arguing against other beliefs, right? It's like the war of religions, right? That's stupid. There has to be an anchor point that everybody may not agree upon, but they are able to agree upon. And it's based on something that they can't decide. It's not a belief. I don't have a belief in yellow, for instance, right? I have an experience of yellow when I have that, right? And I have decided to have it, right? It's not a belief I have. It's just there, right? And it's because it's not a belief, that's why it's important and that's why it's functional, right? Because we can't just reject it as a belief, right?
Psychological, their own psychological state, then there's no reason to think that UFOs exist. We might say similar things about some religious beliefs, if we can provide psychological explanations of why people have certain.
No, but there's also this. It's the when people start to cycle. Usually, it's very common, in my opinion, that people reject something, an official story like, the moon landings and Titanic and 9/11 and JFK and so on. Fine, I'm all for being critical about stuff like that, right? But then they cycle into all kinds of bullshit, right? All kinds of fanciful thinking that where they can just go completely mental in what they believe is another story, right? That completely discredits their skepticism, right? It's the what if kind of philosophy, right? Which is not philosophy. What if, right? No, what if is not a part of philosophy, in my opinion, right? You stay the fuck away from what if, right? Because that's just, I want to connect the dots so I get to something I like, right? I like there to be, what if there is a Santa Claus, right? What if there is a princess, right? What if, right? Wishful thinking.
Religious beliefs say that they've had some revelatory religious experience. If we can explain what happened in psychological terms or in neuroscientific terms, then we've no reason to take that belief serious, no reason to think that the belief is justified. Belief in the thing has been debunked. That's that phrase that's used, perhaps not the most sensitive phrase, but one that's used. And there's a picture here of Philip J. Klass, who was a debunker of UFO theories, known as the Sherlock Holmes of ufology. Now, of course, the fact that a belief has been debunked in this way, that belief in something like UFOs or God has been debunked in this way, doesn't show that the thing doesn't exist. It just shows that we have no reason to think it exists. It could still exist, but it would...
Yeah, I can get behind that to some extent, right? But I need to clarify, right? It's this thing, it's the same argument against God, right? That is, if I am not experiencing or have experienced God, that means that God doesn't exist, right? That's not a good argument. And that's why religion keeps cropping up, because people can't refute God, right? They can't say that God doesn't exist because they haven't experienced it, right? Just because I've never experienced a crocodile, maybe I have. I've never experienced, Burj Al Arab, that big, 1 kilometer high building, right? So just because I've seen a picture of it doesn't mean that I have proven that it exists, right? And but I haven't seen it, right? I haven't experienced it. So I can't say that it doesn't exist just because I haven't experienced it, because it may exactly be because I haven't experienced it. But I can't say either that it exists just because somebody has created a photograph of it or whatever, right? That could be manipulated or, just, trying to screw with my mind, right? So it's like, it's the I don't know answer, right? That is difficult to get to, because people want to get rid of that which they find to be sophist manipulation. They don't want to stay with I don't know. They want to say, no, you go away, right? And have a knockdown argument for it, right? But these arguments for existence you haven't experienced, refuting existence you haven't experienced, doesn't work, because it has to be, it's very, very, very difficult to argue against existence you haven't experienced, right? Exactly because you haven't experienced it. And if it doesn't exist, you won't experience it, right? But you haven't experienced everything that you can possibly experience. And also that's the point of in the now. If you have experienced something in the past, doesn't mean that exists as such, as a concept anymore, right? Like, the Twin Towers of 9/11, right? At 8/11, there was the Twin Towers. At 10/11, right, there were no Twin Towers, right? So if you only were there at 8/11, well, then you have an idea that they exist. And if you went into a coma for a few years and woke up and say, well, there are two towers, people will say, no, there are not two towers. Yes, there is. I have experienced the two towers. So on, right? So there are huge problems in epistemology there. And that's also one thing you might, dive into. Why is he talking about knowing? Which is what I'm hearing here, right? This is not about qualia. This is about knowledge. It's a different beast, right? It has to be treated differently because it's a separate, classically it has been seen as a separate kind of philosophy that builds upon metaphysics rather than being a part of metaphysics.
It would be a big coincidence if it did. The reports that the believers give us are no grounds for thinking that it exists. So here's a quotation from David Chalmers in which he sums up the debunking argument. If the explanation of our beliefs about X, where X might be UFOs or God or whatever, is independent of X, then our beliefs about X will themselves be independent of X. That is to say, if we can explain why people believe something without supposing that the thing actually exists and that they've come in contact with it, then those beliefs themselves exist quite independently of whatever the thing is, God or UFOs or whatever. And if so, it will be entirely a matter of luck whether those beliefs are correct. So that the beliefs are not justified. So if what caused a person to believe in UFOs had nothing at all to do with UFOs, then their belief in UFOs certainly wasn't justified. And
no, but a belief is it's again this old Platonic idea of justified true belief we're going into, but we are not doing knowledge here, mate, right? We are doing metaphysics and a particular subset of metaphysics, which is clarifying what the hell we're doing with these qualia, right? Would you mind get back to that? Because it seems like you are cherry picking from categories or philosophies that you shouldn't be dealing with, in my opinion, right? Now, it's still fluffy, this, so I can't say it very clearly, and that's why it's also annoying, this presentation, because there's nothing sort of hard arguments that you can really relate to and say, well, I agree and I disagree, right? It's all this, then there's somebody with a debunking, and then there's this anomalousness, and then there's this and these people saying this, and it's sort of it's all a gray area of maybe it sounds like it could be, right? Oh, man. I don't like philosophy like this.
It would be a big coincidence if it were true. Okay, so we can sum that up here. We start with a position where we have a bunch of reports of UFOs, okay? We go and interview all these people who claim to have seen UFOs.
What is X-Files? Well, those are qualia, right? On a TV screen, sounds and colors and interpretations of stories and, objects. Oh, man. Standing in the bucket and try to lift yourself up.
And we record their testimony, and prima facie, that gives us reason to believe in UFOs. But then suppose we dig a bit deeper and we find that all of these reports can be explained in other ways without supposing that the people had really seen a UFO. Whenever they report a UFO, it turns out that there was a...
Okay, so what I'm hearing is that there's actually a consensus story about what is going on, and if you can find something that fits with the consensus story, then that is preferable. Always. Because that goes with the consensus of what is going on, right? It's like the consensus story of the moon landing is some men were walking around on the moon. They were shot up there with a rocket and walked on the moon and came back again, right? That's the consensus story. And, debunkers, they have a consensus story, which is usually an official story, right? This is the official story of what was going on back then, right? And now, for that matter, right? And in the future. And if they can find some kind of explanation that fits with the consensus story, then they will always go with that because that fits their consensus story, right? And what I like about, flat earthers and conspiracy theory is that they actually challenge what it means to know stuff, right? If you can find one alternative explanation of the same thing, you point out that it's still just a hypothesis or a theory, right? The moon landing is a theory. Or it's a story. I mean, only the 5 people on the moon were there, and they're no longer on the moon, right? So even if they claim they were on the moon, well, how do they prove that, right? So it's like, it's the good thing about this is challenging what it means to know and challenging these consensus stories about what was going on, right? That's what I like about it, right? I'm not a conspiracy theorist in that in the general what if kind of way, but I like to challenge theories and hypotheses that always align themselves with some kind of consensus story that everybody seems to adhere to, right?
Some strange cloud formation present, or some military aircraft, or whatever it might have been.
And it's also this: if you don't want to be, labeled as one of these, tinfoil hat types, right? Oh, then you're one of these weirdos, right? So I better stay with the consensus story, so I feel like I'm a normal dude, just like everybody else in the consensus, right? This is a very strong urge in human beings, right? They want to be a part of the same story. They don't want to be the nail that sticks out, right? It's always the nail that sticks out that's going to be hammered down, right? So there are all sorts of psychological aspects involved in this, right? Why do people willingly take experimental vaccination, quote vaccination? Who says it's a fucking vaccination just because it's called a vaccination shot? And boosters and all sorts of bullshit that is clearly not healthy, because they are afraid of the consensus story, which is this is supposed to be what your masters tell you is good for you, right? If you challenge that, then you're the nail that sticks out and says the emperor has no clothes on, right? Nobody wants to, very few people wants to be like that, right? Now, some people who go deeply into conspiracy, they tip over and take the completely opposite, right? They actually want to be there because it's different than the consensus story. That's also kind of dangerous, right? So being skeptical but staying firmly on the ground, that's where I want to be, right?
And we can explain all of these reports in terms that don't mention UFOs at all. We can explain what caused the people to believe they'd seen a UFO without actually mentioning UFOs at all. Now, in that case, we would no longer have a reason to believe in UFOs. The reports themselves would be...
So now the reports, if they don't fit your consensus story, now the reporting is not in... so it's... You are all over the place. If the reports fits your consensus idea or the preconceived idea, your confirmation bias, then they're great reports. But if they don't fit, I think they're not good reports. So now it's your subjective judgment as some kind of custodian of a consensus story. It's bullshit, man, right? It's stupid philosophy, this.
Discredited as sources of evidence. So we don't believe in UFOs. Now, how does this apply to consciousness? Well,
okay, I think we will stop here and with the meta problem. It sounds like this is a deeper thing. Maybe it will go past the 1 hour mark if we keep doing the meta problem. I don't know. It seems complicated. So let's keep that for the next part. And I want to mention also that the last part was fucked up. It garbled completely. I could I had deleted a lot of files on my computer to save up space, but it only went into my bin, and I didn't delete from the bin, so it still filled up the laptop, right? So I forgot to delete it in the bin, and then the program crashed, right? Some 35 minutes or so into it, and I tried to repair it, and I repaired it as best as I could. But the video and the sound is okay, but the video doesn't fit with the sound and so on in the last part. So I excuse for that. But that'll have to do. I can redo it. The thing. I'm not going to do it once again, right? So sorry about that, but still, I hope you enjoy the show. The show must go on, as they say. And please share, like, and subscribe, and join the Discord link below. And I would like you to ask you to, if you could help me spread the word and, link to Twitter or Facebook and, share this. If you can't donate, there's also donation links below, right? If you can't donate, I would like to have donations, of course. Patreon also, links below. But then please share, right? So share, like, and subscribe to help me get this thing going, right? So there might not be that many doing the thing I'm doing here. So please help out. Otherwise, see you in the next one.